Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because we're taking a deep dive into a topic you probably think you've already got figured out. I mean, when you hear the word blues, what instantly pops into your head? A lone musician on a porch? A tragic tale of a broken heart? Maybe just sad music? Well, get ready to completely shatter that conventional view. Today, we're putting the blues under a microscope and looking at it through an entirely different forensic lens. So we really have to ask ourselves, was the blues actually just sad music? Or was there something much deeper, something totally structural going on beneath those standard 12-bar rhythms? As we're going to see, what sounded like simple, everyday entertainment to the outside world was in reality a brilliant and sophisticated mechanism for survival.
Because here is the core revelation of today's explainer. The blues actually functioned as a highly efficient, decentralized, peer-to-peer intelligence network. Think of it like a literal black box recorder for Black Americans during the Jim Crow era. It was this incredible repository of lived experiences, coded resistance, and real-time socioeconomic reporting. It was literally a survival manual traveling right under the radar.
Section 1. The Hidden Intelligence Network. To really get this, we have to look at the society that actually gave birth to this music. During the Jim Crow era, from the 1890s through the 1950s, Black voices were being systematically erased from formal media, public discourse, and the legal system. When the system completely refuses to acknowledge your reality, how do you communicate? How do you warn your community? Well, you build a hidden network.
Okay. Let's dive into this. Political scientist James C. Scott coined the perfect term for this dynamic, the hidden transcript. Essentially, this is the critique of power that subordinate groups perform completely away from the prying eyes of the powerful. Think about it. A black sharecropper couldn't exactly stand on the steps of a plantation commissary and safely denounce a landowner, right? But he could stand on a stage on a Saturday night and sing a song whose true meaning was crystal clear to every black listener in the room, while remaining totally invisible to the white overseer. And the academic research completely backs this up, tracing the blues directly to African retentions and slave songs. This practice of veiling meaning, using complex rhythms and weaving in supernatural elements like mojo hands or the devil at the crossroads, was passed down generationally. It was a direct continuation of African nonverbal performance traditions, specifically engineered to communicate complaint, revenge, and protest right under the noses of those in power. Section 2. Decoding the blues. Because these musicians often had to perform in front of mixed audiences or under the watchful eyes of the establishment, they became absolute masters of the double entendre. They were, in essence, engaging in subversive journalism.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how they did it. In countless blues songs, you're going to hear about the mean old boll weevil that destroys the cotton crop. On the surface, it's just a bug. But to the intended audience, it was a profound economic protest. The boll weevil was celebrated as the sly, unstoppable force that flat-out refused to respect white property lines. So the weevil looking for a home perfectly mirrored the black tenant farmer defying the landowner in that crushing debt trap of sharecropping. It was a really clever allegory for resilience. But sometimes, that journalism was incredibly direct, exposing the outright failings of the state. Take Charlie Patton's 1929 song about the devastating 1927 Mississippi flood. He sang, "I would go to the hill country, but they got me barred." In this flood, over 600,000 people were displaced. Black families were literally forced by armed guards to stay in flood-ravaged areas to rebuild levees, left stranded on rooftops while white rescuers just passed them by. Patton acted as a forensic journalist here. He didn't have to use the word racism. He just reported the cold, hard facts of the disaster, embedding that social commentary right there in the testimony.
Section 3. Mobility and the Bad Man. To grasp the full picture, we also need to understand the severe physical restrictions placed on Black Southerners during this time. Vagrancy laws and Jim Crow ordinances essentially made it illegal to move freely. So how did the music fight back against a system built to trap labor?
Well, it fought back with powerful imagery. The absolute most pervasive blues metaphor for freedom was the train. When you hear that yodeling, whoo-hoo, imitating a train whistle in those old tracks, it wasn't just some catchy musical trope. Singing about catching a train was a direct vocal protest against the restriction of movement. It was a validation of the Great Migration. To sing about moving was quite literally to sing about self-emancipation.
And that brings us to another major theme, the bad man persona. We're talking about characters like Stagger Lee, boasting of violence or outrunning the law. Now, middle-class reformers often cringed at this stuff, but historically speaking, it was a necessary psychological coping mechanism. In a society that systematically denied black men any semblance of power, the bad man was a fantasy of total power. He asserted a fiction of sovereignty. This bad man answers to no one, and he is never lynched. It was a symbolic reversal of the daily terror and powerlessness of Jim Crow, restoring a sense of agency through narrative.
Section 4. Women subverting the system. Now, we absolutely cannot talk about the blues without talking about the foundational, radical role that women played in this hidden network. They were commanding stages, subverting societal expectations, and carving out a space for female testimony that was entirely unprecedented.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it perfectly captures the sheer defiance of Gertrude Ma Rainey. She is widely credited as the first popular entertainer to truly incorporate the blues. Short, stout, rocking horsehair wigs and a necklace literally made of gold coins, she was a massive draw. She integrated audiences right in the middle of the Jim Crow South. She separated from her husband, launched her own show, and even bought her own tour bus with her name plastered on the side. Her very existence, her financial independence, and her open bisexuality completely defied the intense racism and sexism of the 1920s.
Just listen to her lyrics. She sang, "Went out last night with a crowd of my friends. They must have been women because I don't like no men." I mean, wow. The mother of the blues frankly asserted her independence and her sexuality in an era of extreme, suffocating oppression. Black women in Jim Crow were expected to serve white families, work like men, and remain entirely submissive. Ma Rainey and others like Bessie Smith completely and totally rejected that script.
Moving on to Section 5. The blues behind bars. Our explainer pivots now to the darkest corners of the Jim Crow system, the convict lease system, and southern prison farms like Parchment and Angola. This was a brutal mechanism built up in the wake of emancipation to essentially extract free labor under the constant threat of violence.
The historical texts are pretty clear here, detailing how these institutions basically recreated the conditions of slavery. Work songs and field hollers weren't just musical expressions. They were necessary to break up the monotony and keep work gangs swinging their axes in perfect time so they wouldn't accidentally injure each other. But here's the thing, these prisons weren't just sites of physical extraction, they became sites of cultural extraction too. Folklorists like John Lomax and his son Alan actually descended on these segregated prisons, treating them as these isolated laboratories of pure black music. They recorded artists like Lead Belly, often acting with this stunning level of paternalism and, frankly, financial exploitation.
And that financial exploitation isn't just some relic of the past. Take a look at this number, $1.99. That is the cost today to download a single song via modern carceral media platforms like JPay. These platforms act as intermediaries between incarcerated musicians and their audiences right now, making a profit off their creativity while charging these exorbitant fees just for distribution.
So, why do incarcerated people still choose to perform? Well, listen to Carla Simmons. She's a current member of the women's choir Voices for Hope at a Georgia State prison, and she had this realization. She said, "I really saw in a new way the political tool that we were for the state. It's incredibly poignant. The state continues to use black musical talent, often gospel choirs, to bolster its own moral legitimacy and spin this redemption narrative. Meanwhile, the performers are accepting unpaid labor, doing it just for a decent meal, a fleeting glimpse of the outside world, or that faint, dangling hope of parole." Section 6. A legacy of survival. As we bring this explainer toward a close, we have to recognize the incredible durability of the blues. It absolutely does not stand as a mere catalog of sadness. No, it is a towering monument to human complexity and systemic resistance. Jim Crow sought to reduce individuals to simple, obedient machines, but the blues insisted, loudly and clearly, that they were beings of profound complexity. Let's move to and see how this builds across our timeline. Starting from the African retentions and slave songs of the 1850s, evolving into the Jim Crow field hollers of the 1890s, completely exploding during the recording era of the 1920s, and eventually migrating to the urban centers in the 1950s. This unbroken chain of music effectively neutralized the state's efforts to isolate and atomize black communities. It was an alternative archive, a people's history securely preserved in song.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly vital thought to chew on. The blues was a subversive, highly intelligent network of survival. It took raw rage, shaped it into a compelling story, and validated a shared suffering. But as this complex network of investigative journalism was slowly, steadily commodified by the mainstream into simple pop blues entertainment, we really have to ask, when the hidden transcript is finally read aloud and stripped of its political teeth, who ultimately profits from the silence? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the history you think you know.